Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarech, we are continuing with Perek Shishi in the Rambam's Hilchos Talmud Torah, the 6th chapter in the Rambam's Laws of Torah Study, in his Sefer Mada, his book of knowledge. And we are continuing to discuss the kavod that is incumbent on a great Torah scholar, the honor that is required to be shown towards somebody who possesses great knowledge within Torah. Halacha Aleph, the Rambam begins, Kol Talmid Chachamim mitzvah la'adarei. Every single Torah scholar requires a certain level of respect, even if he's not your direct teacher. As the pasuk says, that because of his white hairs, you should stand up and you should honor those wise people. So now we're going to say, what's a zaken? This is somebody who acquired a lot of wisdom. The Rambam is defining somebody who's a zaken as somebody who has lots of wisdom, regardless of his age. Even if he's young, he can still be called a zaken because he has this level of chachma. When does a person need to stand for this chacham? We mentioned this in yesterday's Perek also. So when he enters within 4 cubits of where you're sitting, but then you could sit down the moment that he passes your eyesight. Halacha Beis, the Rambam speaks about situations where standing is not required. You wouldn't stand for this elder, nor in the bathhouse or in the bathroom. As the pasuk says, Takum v'hadarta. You should stand and give him respect. It means that this has to be a standing which comes with dignity. And the commentaries point out that this restriction of standing in a place that's undignified would apply to any place where Torah is unable to be learned. Because since you're standing for the sage just because of his Torah knowledge, so therefore it applies only in a place where it would be dignified for somebody to learn Torah. The ein ba'alei umanios chayav la'amid mipnei talmidei chachamim b'shasha asukim b'melachton. Somebody who's a worker, a artisan, does not need to stand during his work. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, takom v'hadarta, that you should stand and dignify. Just like dignity doesn't come at the price of losing money, so too this standing doesn't need to come at the price of losing money. And the Kesef Mishneh and the Ran have a disagreement whether this is a requirement or if a person desires to stand, he would be able to stand. Now, what's behind their argument? According to the Kesef Mishneh, it's all about this dignity, and therefore, if a person wants to stand, he's able to stand. However, the Ran holds that if suddenly certain artisans started to stand and others refused to stand, so it would look very bad for those who decided to sit when the Chacham walks by, and therefore he holds that in all opportunities, a person must stay seated. Now, we should also stress that this machlekes is only applied when a person is working for himself. He's doing his own tasks. Let's say he's a blacksmith, etc., and he's doing his own work. However, if somebody's working for somebody else, everybody would agree that it's usher to stand, because then you're taking away time from his job that he paid you to do, and therefore it could be stealing, and therefore everyone would agree you would stay seated. The Rambam continues, how do we know a person can't look the other direction? He hears, let's say, somebody walking, he knows he's a chacham, so he looks down in order that he doesn't make eye contact with this guy, and then he doesn't have to stand. Talmud Leimar, because we learn, V'yoresa melekecha, hakol davar shu masar lalev namar bay v'yoresa melekecha. Since we see you shall fear your God put in this pasuk, anytime we have the words you shall fear your God, we're talking about feelings that a person harbors in his heart. And the point of putting you shall fear your God at the end of those psukim is to tell us that Hashem is able to see into those hearts, and therefore you have to be cognizant of that. And even if you're harboring the feelings inside, so you have to take into account God Almighty. And therefore we see from here that you can't even move your eyes away from the sage, because even though the sage is going to think that you didn't know that he was there, God Almighty knows that you purposely moved away your eyes, and therefore you have to stand. Halacha Gimel, the Rambam speaks about certain actions that the wise sage should take not to overburden the people. A wise sage should not place himself in the front of the group of people in order that everybody has to stand for him. Rather, he should find shortcuts in the city. And he should take these shortcuts in order that people don't see him and have to stand. And the sages used to go all the way around the city to the outskirts where nobody even knows who they are, in order that people don't feel burdened and have to keep on standing when they see him. Halacha Daled, the Rambam speaks about riding. In this context, riding an animal is like walking. And this is in contrast to, let's say, in Hilchos Krishma, where it has the halacha of sitting. But in this context, riding is like walking. And just like you stand before a wise sage who's walking by you, so too you would stand if a wise sage is riding by you. Halacha hey, the Rambam says, let's say 3 people are walking together. So what order do they stand? Harav be'emsa. So you have the Torah teacher in the middle. And now remember, we said that you should never walk side by side with your Torah teacher. So the other 2 are going to be slightly behind. Gadol miyaminoi. And of the 2 students, whoever is the wiser of the 2, he stands on the right side. He's the, so to speak, right-hand man. Katan mismailei. And the less wise one stands on the left, again, slightly behind the teacher. Halacha vav, the Rambam returns to standing before a Talmud Chacham. Haraya Chacham ein oimed milfanav ad sheyagia lo la'arba ames. Like we said before, when a Talmud Chacham walks by you, you don't have to stand until he enters your Dalet Amis, your 4x4 cubits in your surrounding area. V'kevan she'avar yoshev. But then once he passes, even when he's still within the 4 Amis, but he passes your eyesight, so you can sit. Now, Ra Av Beistin. Let's say you see the Av Beistin. So who's the Av Beistin? In the time of the Gemara, you would have the Nasi. He was the top position in the community. The person directly under him was the Av Beistin. So now if this Av Beistin walks by, you have to stand the moment he enters your eyesight, even from a distance, past 4 amas. And then you wait till he passes your 4 cubits in order to sit. Now this is a greater level of honor given to the Av Beistin. Now, if you see the Nasi, who we said was above the Av Beistin in the totem pole, he was usually the wisest sage of the generation, and he was literally taking the place of Moshe Rabbeinu. So if you see him walking by, so you have to stand the moment he enters your eyesight, and you can't sit until either he sits or he exits your eyesight in the other direction. And if the Nasi wants to relinquish his honor, so then he could. And this is in contrast to a king who is never allowed to relinquish his honor. So now when this Nasi enters into the Beis HaMedrash, Kol Ha'am Aimdin, everybody in the room has to stand up, and they cannot sit until he tells them, please be seated. Now what happens when the number 2, the Av Beistin, enters the Beis HaMedrash? So, now, back in the day, the Beis Medrash was not like we have it today with pews and tables, etc., except everybody sat on the floor. So now when the Av Beistin used to walk in, 2 rows, meaning the 2 closest people, would stand and create a pathway that he could walk in from the door of the Beis Medrash to his seat. But everybody else was able to remain seated. Everybody else did not have to stand. So you had the 2 rows that would stand in order to allow him to pass, but everybody else would be seated. Now, we see that there's a difference between in the marketplace and in the Beis Medrash. In the marketplace, everybody had to stand for the Av Beistin, at least for some time, whereas in the Beis Medrash, only these 2 rows. And perhaps we could suggest that the reason why is to give kavod to the Torah, giving kavod to Shemayim, which gives the Av Beistin his kavod in the first place. B'nei Chachamim v'Salmidei Chachamim. Now, the children of the sages and their students, these are the people that they were their best students, etc. Bizman shaharabim tzrichin lahem. At a time when the teachers need them in order to ask sharp questions, in order to develop their thoughts, etc. So they're able to jump over, so to speak, people's heads. Again, everybody's sitting on the floor, and these people are able to climb over all the other students, even though it's going to cause them some level of disruption in order that they can get to the front of the class and help the rabbi out. And it's not nice that this Talmud Chacham should enter the Beis Medrash last. He should be there one of the first. Now, if he needs to leave for one of his necessities, so then he could, and then he returns to his place. Now, the children of these Talmidei Chachamim, even though they may not be the highest level of students, and the Beis Medrash is filled with people that are much bigger Talmidei Chachamim and much more refined people, however, the moment that they could hear, so then they're able to turn their face facing their father, meaning they're able to sit in the front of the study hall, which was usually reserved for the top students. They're able to sit there out of honor for their father who holds this high position. But if they're not able to listen, so then they don't get this special accommodation that they get to sit facing their father, rather they face the nation, even though they're still in the front. Once they could hear and actually learn the Torah that he's teaching, so then he could face his father. Halacha chas, that Rambam says, Talmud who yoshev lefnei Rabbi Talmud. Let's say you have a student, he's always with this great Rabbi all the time. sitting with him in the base medrash, etc. He's only allowed to stand up for him when he enters twice, once in the morning and once in the night. Meaning, here's a Talmud Chacham, he's probably getting up many times, moving around, etc. This guy does not have to stand. Not only does he not have to, he can't stand more than twice. Why? So the honor that he affords to this Torah sage should not be more than that which we afford to Torah study. Now, what is it talking about? Well, we know that we're makablim the Ol Malchus Shamayim twice daily. We accept the yoke of heaven twice every single day. Once by Kriya Shema Shal Shacharis, and once by Kriya Shema Shal Arvis, when we say the Shema in the morning and at night. And therefore, we establish that a person should not stand more than that, because those are the times where we accept the yoke of heaven, and we wouldn't want it to look like we're accepting the yoke of this Talmud scholar more than that of Hashem. Halacha test that I'm going to speak about old people who are not Torah sages. Mishu zaken muflag bizikna, somebody who's very old. Afal pisha eina chacham, even if he's not one of these wise people. Oimdin lefanav, you should stand before him. Vafilu hechacham shehu yeled oimid bifnei hazaken hamuflag bizikna. Let's say you have a young person who's a Talmud Chacham, and now this old wise person comes by who's not a Talmud Chacham. The young person should stand for the old person. Now, this standing doesn't have to be a full standing. Rather, you just gotta show some sort of sign that you're giving him dignity. So a little bit in today's day, we would call it the little. You just raise yourself off the chair a little bit. And even if this old person is a non-Jew, you should still make him feel dignified, and you should tell him nice things, and if he needs help walking, etc., you should give him your arm and to help out. Shamar, as the pasuk says, that because of a person's white hair, you should stand kol seva b'mashma, which implies that anybody who has these type of white hairs, meaning any old person, not necessarily somebody who learns Torah, you should stand for. Halacha Yud, that I'm going to speak about certain things that a Talmud Chacham, a Torah sage, is exempt from. Talmidei Chachamim einun yotzin lasis ba'atzman im kol hakol bevinyan v'charifa shel medina v'kayotze v'han. A wise sage does not go out with the rest of the people to build and to dig certain things that the government requires of the city to build. Now, what would happen is that the city would say, we need you to all help build a road, etc. So the Talmud Chacham would not be required to go out there and start digging himself. He would be required to help contribute to the building costs of that project. Why doesn't he do that? Because we don't want the ignoramuses in the city to look at him digging and doing all these menial labor and to lose respect for this Torah sage. Now, they are completely exempt even from paying for helping to fix the walls or fixing gates of the city or paying the watchmen of the city, etc. And why is that? Unlike the first category, which had to do with general betterment of the city, these things all have to do with protection. And since this Torah sage is sitting there and learning, he's actually contributing to the protection of the city. And he doesn't have to contribute to the present that they would give to the king. And he shouldn't be required to pay taxes. There were two types of taxes. There was a tax that the king would say, this city is required to contribute X amount of dollars. And then there was a tax that every single person would be required to pay. And in both of these instances, the Talmud Chacham should be exempt. Now, in certain times in Jewish history, the king himself exempted these Torah scholars. But in a time where the government does not recognize the Torah scholars and their exemption from paying the taxes, the community would actually have to go and pick up the burden in order so that the scholar does not have to pay these taxes. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, Gam ki yitnu ba'goyim ata akabtem v'yachelu ma'at mimasa melech v'sarim. You will also be included in giving of the nations, aka the taxes, ata akabtem v'yachelu ma'at mimasa melech v'sarim. But you now will be freed from paying the burden of the king and the officers, implying that who is exempt from paying these taxes. Let's say a Talmud Chacham has something that he needs to sell. We put him first in the order of sales at the marketplace. And nobody else is able to start selling their items until the Talmud Chacham's items are sold. Let's say he has to stand in judgment, and there's many other people who also need their judgment adjudicated. Well, he gets precedent in the order of which he's going to be judged, meaning he's going to be first. And not only that, but he also is seated. We have a general mitzvah that litigants should be standing in Beis Din. However, in this instance, because of the kavod given to the Talmud Chacham, so he's able to sit. And it's interesting because in an instance where Talmud Chacham would be sitting in Beis Din, so we actually seat his other litigant as well, in order that it doesn't look unbiased or that the judges would have favor towards the Talmud Chacham. So in this rare instance, you have the Talmud Chacham and whoever his defendant or litigant is also seated. Halacha Yud Aleph, the Rambam speaks about how serious it is to degrade a Talmud Chacham. Oven gadol hu levazis chachamim. It's a huge sin to degrade these Torah scholars, or to hate them. The first Beis Hamikdash was not destroyed until they reached the level where they degraded these sages. Shnamar, the pasuk says, "V'yu mal'ivim b'malachei ha'elokim uvaizim dvarav umit atitim b'neviyav," that you mock the messengers of God and you embarrass the words of those people and you scoff his prophets. Klaimar, which means to say, Baizim Melamdei Dvarav. What does that mean? You're degrading the person who teaches over his words, aka the Torah scholars. And this is also what we see in the Torah. Im bechukaisai tim asu, if you despise my statutes. Melamdei chukaisai tim asu. What does that mean? The person who teaches my statutes, you hate. And anybody who degrades a great Torah scholar, he has no portion in the world to come. And this is included in those who scorn the words of God, which we've seen many times until now, which meaning somebody who doesn't have a place in the coming world. Even though one who disrespects a sage has no portion in the world to come. Imbo edim shibizo, if you have witnesses, and the commentaries add, this doesn't even need to be kosher witnesses, but you just have somebody come and say that they saw somebody degrading this scholar. Afilu bidvarim, even if he disgraces him with just words alone. Chayiv nidoy, he is required to be placed in a ban of ostracization, aka chedem. And not only that, but they go out and they announce so-and-so person is placed in cherem for his actions. And we find him a litra of gold, which is 168 grams worth of gold, which, just to understand, in today's day, that amount of gold would be worth $10,584. And we're talking about over 1,000 years ago. So that would be the fine for the disgrace of a Talmud Chacham. The niceness also l'chacham, and you would give that money to the chacham. And the commentaries have added that in today's day and age, there is no scholar that reaches the level that would actually get this amount of money. But in the past, there were scholars that were embarrassed, and this was the fine that a person would have to pay for embarrassing him. And somebody who embarrasses and degrades a scholar with words, afilu la'achar misa, even after the scholar has died, a court is able to place him in this cherem, this ostracization. And then they could remove the cherem when the person does tshuva and returns. But if the sage is still alive, then the person cannot have the ban removed until he goes and appeases the person who he was placed in cherem for in the first place. He has to go and ask forgiveness. Now, this is a very interesting set of rules. Let's say you have a person who starts to degrade a Talmud Chacham. The Talmud Chacham himself could place this person, so long as he is an ignoramus, in a ban of ostracization. He doesn't need witnesses, and he doesn't need to warn this person, which are the general prerequisites for placing a person in any sort of punishment, etc. in Torah law. You need these two things, but in this case, you don't. And now this person, this Amaretz, this ignoramus, is not able to get his ban removed until he goes and appeases the Talmud Chacham. And now if this Chacham dies, but in Shleisha Umatir, then he needs to get a basin of any three people, and they need to remove this ban of ostracization from him. Now if this scholar wants to, again, if the scholar wants to forsake his honor, so therefore when a person disrespects him, etc., he wants to then go and forsake this ability for this guy to go into ostracization. He says, it's okay, I'll take the disrespect and the degradation rather than this guy be put in this ban. So then he's allowed to do that. Now, again, we should stress what we've stressed before, that this only applies, A, when it's between man and man, but if a person is degrading God, so therefore he has a requirement to put him in this ban of ostracization. And not only that, but if it was done in private, if it was done in public, a person was embarrassing a Torah sage in public, so therefore we have to put him in this ban of ostracization, again, because We said previously that when somebody embarrasses a Torah sage, he's actually embarrassing God in some way, and therefore, in public, we would need to put him in this ban of ostracization. Halacha Yud Gimel, Harav Shinida Lichvaydai. Let's say a teacher puts somebody in ostracization because they are degrading his honor. Chayavin Kol Talmidov Linhoig Nidoi Bamenuda. So then all of his students need to follow this ban of ostracization against this person. Aval Talmid Shinida Lichvayd Atzmai. But if a student, albeit a wise Torah scholar, puts somebody in this level of Chedam ostracization, so then Ein Harav Chayiv Linhag Boy Nidoy. Then his teacher need not follow this ban of ostracization. About Kolaam Chayovin Linhag Boy Nidoy. But anybody who's of a lower statute of this Talmud Chacham, they would need to follow the ban. V'chein Min Nudet Lanasi, and so too, let's say the Nasi, again, who's the highest level in all of Klal Yisrael, puts a ban of ostracization on somebody. Min Nudet L'chol Yisrael. Then everybody in Am Yisrael needs to follow this ostracization. Menuda l'chol Yisrael, ein menuda l'nasi. And now, if, let's say, somebody would be put in a chedem, and everybody in Yisrael follows it, the only person who would be exempt from following that level of chedem would be the nasi himself, because he's the highest level, and he supersedes even the biggest Talmud Chacham from all the people. Menuda l'iroi. So then, menuda l'iracharas, if a city puts a person in chedem, so then all the other cities need to follow this chedem as well. But if another city put a person in chedem, so then they wouldn't need to follow the chedem in their city. AKA, it's all about hierarchy. If the ban of ostracization comes from a higher source, so everybody below him has to follow that ostracization, except for him and people above him. That's why the Nasi, who's the highest on the totem pole, his ostracizations apply to all of Klal Yisrael. Halacha Yudalid, the Rambam qualifies what we just said. When all these apply, where there's different levels and different people have to follow the ostracization versus not. That only has to do with a ostracization placed on a person because he degraded a Torah sage. But somebody who's placed in a ban of ostracization for any other of the reasons that a person would be placed under ostracization, which we're going to enumerate shortly, even if it was a small child that put this ban of ostracization on somebody, then even the Nasi of Yisrael and everybody else would need to follow this ostracization until the person does tshuva and he gets this ban removed. So now we're going to enumerate. We place a person in chedem ostracization for 24 reasons, bein ish, bein isha, regardless if it's a man or a woman, the eluhain. And here are the 24. Aleph, number 1, somebody who embarrasses the grades of Talmud Chacham even after he's dead. Beis 2, somebody who embarrasses and degrades the emissary of Beis Din. This was the person that fulfilled all of Beis Din's requests, etc. Gimel 3, somebody who calls his friend who's not actually a servant. They call him a servant. Dalet 4, somebody who is lax and degrades even one small, minute detail of a rabbinic law, and we don't need to say this would apply to some Torah law, meaning even though there's other punishments for transgressing a Torah law, however, somebody who would cause others to transgress this Torah law, we would also place him in a ban of ostracization. Hey, 5, he had a court date and he did not show up. Vav 6, somebody who won't accept his judgment, he is placed in ostracization until he accepts the judgment. Zayin 7, let's say somebody has something dangerous in his property, like a dangerous dog or a faulty ladder. So the so then we put him in this chedem until he removes this dangerous object. Ches 8, somebody who sells his property, his land, to a non-Jew. So then we place him in a level of ostracization until he pays for the level of harm that his neighbor, the Jew, is going to have to deal with based on the fact that this guy was put as his neighbor. And we have a machlokes between Tosfos and the Rambam. Tosfos holds this only applies if the Jew was willing to pay the same amount of money as the guy paid for the field, and you still sold it to the guy instead of the Jew, and therefore you would be required to pay. The Rambam holds that you would even need to take a loss to sell the field and the property to your neighbor who's a Jew over selling it to a guy. Tas 9. Let's say somebody takes his friend who's a Jew to the Goyish courts, the non-Jewish courts, and the courts require him to pay a sum of money that would not be required by halachic law. So therefore, we put him in ostracization until he pays the amount. Yod tas tabach kayin she'ein mafresh. So let's say you have a kohen who also serves as a butcher. Now, a kohen gets certain gifts. He gets the shank bone and the jaw, etc., from any person who is shechting an animal. Now, if a kohen is a butcher, he has to separate those gifts and give them to another kohen. Now, if this person does not do so, we put him in a bed of ostracization until he gives it to another kohen. Now, somebody who degrades Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galius, which is the second day of Yom Tov that we celebrate outside of Eretz Yisrael. Somebody who degrades this minhag, this custom, he also gets put into cherem. Yud Beis 12. Somebody who does work after midday, which was the time when they used to bring the carbon Pesach. After midday, he gets put into cherem. Yud Gimel 13. Hamazkir Shem Shamayim Levatala Oilishvu B'Divrei Avai. Somebody who makes a false swear or transgresses God's name in vain. He also gets put in cherem. Yud Daled 14. Hamevi Es Harabim Lidei Chil Hashem. Somebody who causes the desecration of God's name publicly. Tesvav 15. Hamevi Es Harabim Lidei Achilas Kachim B'chutz. Somebody who causes the rest of the nation to eat the sanctified foods outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Tes Zayin 16. Hamechashev Shanim V'Kaiveya Chadashim B'chutz La'aretz. Somebody who does the calculations and the establishment of the calendar and the years, which we do only in Eretz Yisrael. Somebody who does these outside of Eretz Yisrael, he also does. Yud Zayin 17. Hamachshil as ha'avir. Somebody who places a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Again, this is not actually talking about a stumbling block in front of a blind person, but it means somebody who misguides another spiritually. Yud Ches 18. Hama'akiv as harabim milases mitzvah. Somebody who causes the entire public or a large group of people to refrain from doing a positive commandment. Yud Tes 19. Tabach shiyotza treifa mitachas yadai. A butcher who sells not kosher meat. Chaf 20. Tabach shalai badak sakinai lifnei chacham. A butcher who doesn't get his knife checked by a Torah sage before using it. Chaf Aleph 21. Hamekasha atzmai ladas. Somebody who causes himself to get an erection by his own volition. Chaf Beis 22. Mi shegeir says ishtei va'asa beinoyu ve'na shutvos a masu matan. Hamevin lahem lizakek zelazah kishiyavish neim levestin minad denoisan. Let's say you have a couple who gets divorced, and then they do things that cause them to be in close contact. They go into business together, or they start a partnership. Anything where the two will have to be together more than necessary. So then, when they come to Beis Din, we put them in cherem. Chav Gimel 23. Chacham sheshmu oisai ra'a. Any wise sage who practices unsavory practices. And Chaf Dalid, Hamenedemi, She'ena Chayiv Nidoy. Somebody is placed in cherem for placing a false ban of cherem on somebody else. And those are the 24 reasons a person will be put in Nidoy, in cherem. And in Ritz Hashem, we will continue with Parak Shvi'i tomorrow.